Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into the warm, dust-scented hills of Antioquia, Colombia, in the late 1950s. Picture a wide stretch of land where the horizon rolls into green slopes. The smell of coffee blossoms drifts lazily on the breeze, and somewhere, a few horses stamp their hooves in the early light. This is where Jorge Luis Ochoa Vásquez's story begins. Not in the neon-lit chaos of Miami or the tense streets of Medellín, but in the quiet pulse of a ranch. You probably won't survive this if you try to play it the way he did. Too many smiles hiding too many deals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious where in the world these stories find their way. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Ochoa family land stretches for acres, stitched together by fences that have been mended and remended for decades. Jorge grows up with the steady rhythm of ranch life, feeding horses, tending to cattle, and listening to the older men tell stories under the mango trees. Antioquia's countryside in those days feels far removed from the rest of Colombia's turbulence, though in truth, its peace is an illusion. Beyond the hills, change is stirring in the cities, and it will find its way here soon enough. Jorge's father, Fabio Ochoa Restrepo, is a respected horse breeder, a man with the kind of handshake that ends business deals without a single paper signed. Jorge learns early that your word, if kept, can be more powerful than a lawyer's contract. He also learns the subtler lessons: how to read a man's eyes when he's deciding whether to trust you, how to say less but mean more. The mornings are long and patient. Jorge rides out with his brothers, Fabio Jr. and Juan David, checking on livestock. They don't yet speak of money beyond the ranch's needs, but they do talk about dreams, of owning more land, winning more polo matches, raising horses that could fetch a small fortune. And always, there's a sense of the world beyond Antioquia, a place they've only glimpsed in magazines brought in by traveling traders. Occasionally, a visitor will arrive from the city, an old friend of their father's, sometimes a politician, sometimes a businessman. Jorge notices how conversations change when these men are around, how certain topics are never spoken aloud. He's still too young to connect the dots, but the seed of curiosity is planted. In the evenings, the family gathers in the main house. The lamps flicker, casting shadows that sway with the night breeze. Jorge listens more than he speaks, but every so often, a glance passes between the adults. The kind of glance that says, there's more to this world than horses and coffee. Years later, many people still think that Jorge's quiet upbringing was untouched by the undercurrents of the Colombian underworld. But consider the way alliances are born, not in smoky back rooms, but over shared meals and mutual favors. So what do you think? Was this the innocence of youth, or the early shaping of a man who would one day co-found one of the most infamous cartels in history? By the time Jorge reaches his late teens, Antioquia is still his world, but it's no longer enough. The ranch feels both endless and confining, wide open in space, but narrow in opportunity. Somewhere out there, beyond the mountains, lies a chance to turn his family's name into something far greater, though at a cost none of them can yet imagine. The night closes in around the ranch, the cicadas singing like they always do, the stars scattered above. Jorge sits on the porch, looking toward the hills. It's the same land he's always known, but in his mind, he's already riding far beyond it. The Ochoa brothers are a matched set in ambition, but not in temperament. Fabio Jr., the eldest, carries himself with a steady seriousness, the kind that settles disputes with a firm voice. Juan David, the youngest, is quick-witted, a man who can make allies out of strangers before the day is through. And in between them stands Jorge, measured, careful, and always listening before he speaks. Growing up together on the ranch has bound them in ways they don't need to discuss. Each knows the other's strengths and weaknesses, a familiarity born from years of shared chores, polo practice, and the occasional scuffle that ended in laughter rather than bruises. The land has been their common ground, but as the 1970s roll into the picture, they begin to sense a larger horizon calling to them. The Ochoa's entry into the world beyond cattle and polo begins innocently enough. Their father's reputation in horse breeding opens doors that might have remained closed to less respectable men. Wealthy buyers from Medellín and Bogotá arrive to inspect the prized Paso Fino horses, and the brothers take note, not just of the deals made, but of the cars their visitors drive, the jewelry their wives wear, the way they talk about business ventures with a certain coded language. Fabio Jr. is the first to speak of expansion, not in so many words, but in the quiet suggestion that there are opportunities beyond the paddocks. Jorge hears him, but doesn't push the conversation. He's learned that some things are better left to unfold in their own time. The brothers begin to take short trips into Medellín, at first under the pretext of delivering horses or meeting potential buyers. The city is alive with a kind of energy that the countryside can't match. Noisy streets, the smell of street food mixing with exhaust fumes, and the constant pulse of money-changing hands. They stay in modest hotels, spend their days at polo clubs or racing tracks, and their nights in restaurants where the real conversations begin after the waiters have cleared the plates. One evening, in a dimly lit bar near El Poblado, a man known for his connections to import-export businesses leans across the table toward Jorge. His tone is casual, but his eyes hold the weight of the offer. If you can move a horse, you can move anything. Jorge doesn't answer right away, but the words stay with him. By the mid-70s, the brothers' bond has evolved into something more strategic. Each takes on a role. Fabio Jr. handling formal business and appearances, Juan David managing the social side, and Jorge acting as the quiet bridge between worlds. They speak in codes, not because they expect anyone to overhear, but because discretion has already become a habit. There's an understanding between them that they will move together or not at all. This unity makes them harder to approach for outsiders, but it also makes them a force to be reckoned with once they choose a path. Many people still think that it was Escobar who single-handedly built Medellín's empire, but those who were close know the Ochoas were already laying the groundwork for something far larger. So, what do you think? Was this loyalty, caution, or a calculated way to hold power in reserve? Back on the ranch, their father still believes their time in Medellín is about horses and clients. Maybe he chooses not to see the shift in his sons, the way their conversations turn toward shipping routes, currency exchanges, and contacts in Panama. Or maybe he sees it all and decides not to intervene. After all, every generation chooses its own battles. One night, after a long day of tending to the ranch's affairs, the three brothers sit on the veranda, sharing a bottle of rum. The moonlight paints the fields in silver, and the air is thick with the scent of rain on dry earth. Jorge looks from one brother to the other and realizes that whatever they build from here on out, it will bear all their names. Whether spoken aloud or whispered in fear, horses are the Ochoa's passport into circles where most young men from rural Antioquia would never be welcome. By the late 1970s, Jorge has learned how to walk through a crowded polo pavilion without drawing more attention than he wants, just enough to be remembered as the quiet one with a sharp suit and sharper instincts. The equestrian world, for all its elegance, is also a place where deals are made away from prying eyes. Wealthy ranchers, politicians, and businessmen gather under the same tent, smiling over champagne while sizing each other up. For the Ochoas, the arena is more than sport. It's an open-air marketplace for whispers and handshakes. Through the horses, Jorge meets buyers who pay in cash, in gold, and sometimes in favors. He notices how easily goods can pass across borders under the pretext of competition. Special saddles, custom crates, and even entire trailers move without much scrutiny when linked to a champion horse. The brothers are not yet in the cocaine trade, but the framework is there. It starts small. A contact in Panama asks if they can transport something light but valuable along with a horse shipment. It's not drugs, at least not yet, but it's a lesson in logistics. They learn about customs officials who can be persuaded to overlook certain cargo, about paperwork that can be prepared in ways that discourage further questions, about how a smile and a tip can turn inspection into a formality. Jorge becomes skilled at maintaining his composure in these moments. He has the kind of face that doesn't give away excitement or fear, and that makes him valuable. If Fabio is the strategist and Juan David the diplomat, Jorge is the calm in the middle of the storm. The brothers also understand the value of blending in. At equestrian events, they dress like the other competitors, talk about bloodlines and training regimens, and keep any business talk vague enough to pass as chatter. The money from these early side ventures isn't enormous, but it's more than they'd earn from horses alone. More importantly, it builds relationships with exporters, transport companies, and the kind of men who might one day need a shipment moved without questions. One evening in Bogota, after a long day at a national championship, Jorge finds himself at a dinner table with a mix of ranchers and traders. Someone brings up the growing market in Miami for fine horses, and another mentions, almost casually, that the city's appetite for luxury imports isn't limited to animals. Jorge doesn't press for details. He just files it away. There's a certain thrill in these exchanges, though Jorge would never admit it openly. The travel, the parties, the feeling of moving in worlds where money flows like water. It's a far cry from the slow, dusty rhythm of the ranch. But it also demands caution. They've seen other men rise quickly and fall just as fast, undone by greed or carelessness. Back in Antioquia, the ranch continues to operate as it always has. Horses are trained, cows are milked, the family name remains respected. Their father takes pride in their growing prominence in the equestrian world. He doesn't ask too many questions about how they're financing new horses or why certain shipments seem more profitable than others. Many people still think that the Ochoas stumbled into the drug world only through Escobar, but here is where the path really begins, quietly, on the edges of horse arenas, with murmurs about moving cargo no one wants to declare. So what do you think? Was it inevitable? Or was there still a moment when they could have chosen differently? By the time the decade closes, Jorge has learned to navigate a network that stretches far beyond the stables. His handshake now reaches into ports, airstrips, and customs offices. The horse shows remain the public face, but beneath them runs a hidden track, and he's already riding it at a steady, deliberate pace. Coffee is Colombia's pride, its scent drifting through kitchens and cafes from Bogota to the smallest mountain villages. In the late 1970s, Jorge sees in it not just a national symbol, but a perfect disguise. Horses can move across borders, yes, but coffee can move in bulk through every port and every customs desk in the country, without a second glance. The idea isn't entirely his at first. It comes from a trader he meets at a coastal polo event, a man who speaks about export permits the way other men talk about lottery tickets. Colombia's coffee industry is vast, well regulated on paper, and yet flexible in ways only insiders understand. Paperwork can be arranged, cargo can be sealed, and a few extra kilos of something expensive can disappear inside burlap sacks that no inspector wants to tear open. The Ochoa brothers begin experimenting. At first, they slip harmless items into shipments, a trial run to test how closely officials are watching. The shipments move without issue, and Jorge understands the power of blending valuable goods with something too ordinary to raise suspicion. By 1978, the brothers' coffee shipments begin to carry more than beans. Not cocaine, not yet, but gemstones, rare art pieces, and currency meant for discreet delivery. The profits grow, and each successful run teaches them something new about ports, shipping lines, and the gaps in government oversight. Medellín, meanwhile, is shifting. The city's underworld is beginning to hum with the energy of a new trade. Cocaine bound for the United States. Jorge hears it in conversations at the polo club, in side remarks made over late-night dinners. He listens, as always, without revealing too much of his own thinking. One evening, over a quiet meal in Medellín, Juan David brings up a name that will soon become unavoidable: Pablo Escobar. He's moving serious weight, Juan David says, leaning back in his chair, and he's looking for people who can move it further. Jorge doesn't answer immediately. He's not against the idea, but he's cautious. Coffee is one thing. Cocaine is another. Still, the logic is hard to ignore. The routes they've built through horses and coffee could easily carry more profitable cargo. And in those years, the U.S. appetite for cocaine is swelling beyond anything Colombia has seen before. The margins are astronomical. One shipment could make more than a year's worth of horse sales. Their father remains in the dark. To him, the coffee export papers and horse transport documents are simply the fruits of his son's expanding business sense. If he suspects more, he doesn't say. Perhaps he chooses not to know. At a coffee warehouse in Cartagena, Jorge watches workers stack sack after sack, the air thick with the scent of roasted beans. He imagines what might be hidden deep inside one of them. No inspector here is eager to cut open a shipment. Too much work, too much risk of damaging the goods. The system is trusting, and that trust can be used. Many people still think that cocaine was smuggled only in flashy, obvious ways. Fast boats, clandestine flights. But in reality, some of the most successful shipments slipped through quietly in everyday cargo. So what do you think? Is it the danger that makes people reckless, or the routine that makes them careless? By the close of the decade, Jorge understands that the world is changing. The horse shows and coffee warehouses are still his stage, but behind the curtain, the next act is already being written. It will involve new partners, higher risks, and profits so large they will test the loyalty of everyone in his orbit. The first meeting with Pablo Escobar is nothing like the cinematic versions people later imagine. No dramatic standoff, no exchange of loaded glances across a smoky room. Just two men sitting at a wooden table in a Medellín club, the air thick with the smell of grilled meat and cigarette smoke. Escobar, still in his early 30s, has a reputation that precedes him. By 1979, he's already known for his ambition. his willingness to take risks others avoid, and his ability to turn opportunity into empire. He wears it lightly, though. Relaxed posture, friendly tone, almost disarming in the way he draws people in. For Jorge, this meeting is both business and calculation. The Ochoas have the roots, the infrastructure, and the discretion. Escobar has the supply and the appetite to expand. It's a natural fit, though both men are careful not to commit too much in their first conversation. The talk drifts between polo matches, mutual acquaintances, and finally, to logistics. Escobar doesn't speak in grand visions. Instead, he talks about small steps, moving a few shipments here and there, testing routes before scaling up. Jorge appreciates this. Big promises are often the first sign of a man who can't deliver. Over the next few months, they meet again, sometimes in Medellín, sometimes in quieter spots away from the city. Trust builds not through words, but through results. Escobar's product moves through the Ochoa's channels, and the money arrives on time. The arrangement is mutually beneficial. For the Ochoas, Escobar provides a steady stream of high-value cargo. For Escobar, the Ochoa's routes are clean, discreet, and backed by people who don't talk unnecessarily. Jorge's role in these early deals is often understated. Fabio Jr. might handle the formal negotiations, and Juan David might charm new intermediaries. But Jorge ensures everything runs smoothly behind the scenes. He checks the manifests, the storage arrangements, the handoffs. His quiet attention to detail is one of the reasons nothing goes wrong in those early days. It's around this time that the Medellín cartel, though not yet formally named, begins to take shape. Other players enter the picture. Carlos later, with his Bahamian air routes. Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, with his rural smuggling networks. But the Ochoas are different. They don't seek the spotlight, and they don't try to outshine Escobar. They build their influence like they build a stable, carefully, with an eye for longevity. One evening, after a successful run, Escobar raises a glass in Jorge's direction. "You keep things quiet," he says with a grin. "I like quiet." It's as close to praise as Jorge needs. Many people still think that the Medellín cartel was a collection of loud, violent men eager for headlines. But in truth, its most effective members often preferred the shadows. So what do you think? Is it the loudest man who leads, or the one who can vanish when the noise starts? By 1980, the relationship between Escobar and the Ochoas is solid enough to withstand the occasional setback, a delayed payment, a shipment that has to be rerouted at the last minute. They share not just profits, but an understanding. In this business, survival depends as much on knowing when to stay silent as on knowing when to act. The cartel is not yet the giant it will become, but the foundation is in place. And for Jorge Ochoa Vásquez, the path ahead is clear. Keep the routes open, keep the money flowing, and never give anyone more information than they absolutely need. The phrase Medellín cartel doesn't yet have the global weight it will soon carry. But by the early 1980s, the core network is already in motion. Jorge Ochoa Vásquez stands in the middle of it, not in the public eye like Escobar, not in the flamboyant orbit of Carlos later, but in the steady role of co-founder whose influence is felt rather than shouted. Meetings are no longer just between a handful of trusted men. They now take place in sprawling ranch houses, luxury apartments, and sometimes in foreign hotel suites far from Colombian soil. Maps are unrolled, shipment schedules cross-checked, and cash totals discussed in a language that's part code, part shorthand for Jorge. The expansion is as much about discipline as it is about daring. Every route they add is tested with smaller loads before being trusted with the real cargo. Every pilot, every port contact, every driver is vetted through layers of intermediaries. Mistakes are costly, and the Ochoas intend to make as few as possible. Escobar handles a different part of the machine: bribes, intimidation, public image, while Jorge keeps the logistics smooth. The others in the inner circle understand this division of labor, even if the outside world later lumps them together as interchangeable cartel bosses. The money starts to move in staggering amounts. Suitcases filled with US dollars arrive from Miami, often flown in on the same small planes that carry the product out. Counting it becomes a full-time job for teams of trusted workers. Warehouses that once held horse feed or coffee now hold bricks of cash stacked to the ceiling. Jorge remains careful not to flaunt it in ways that would draw unwanted attention. His wealth appears in quiet forms: a new ranch, better horses, subtle improvements to the family estate. When he does travel abroad, it's under the pretense of polo tournaments or equestrian sales. Inside the cartel, his reputation is one of reliability. If Jorge says a shipment will leave on Tuesday, it leaves on Tuesday. If he promises a payout, the money arrives without argument. This consistency builds loyalty among their associates, from dock workers in Cartagena to middlemen in Miami. By now, the cartel's structure is beginning to solidify. There's a clear hierarchy, but also a sense of partnership among the founding members. Each controls his own territory and routes, but they cooperate when it benefits everyone. Disputes are settled privately, often over long dinners where the wine flows, but the words are chosen carefully. Many people still think that the Medellín cartel's success was purely a matter of violence, but logistics, boring, meticulous, relentless logistics, were what kept it running. So what do you think? Would fear alone have kept it together, or was it the quiet competence of men like Jorge? By 1981, the Medellín network is moving more product than any smuggling operation in the world's history. The profits are almost surreal, and the risks are growing just as fast. For Jorge, it's not about chasing headlines or territory. It's about making sure that no matter how loud the world becomes, the routes stay open and the money keeps arriving. The cartel is no longer a concept. It's a living machine. And Jorge Ochoa, with his measured words and patient methods, is one of the men holding its engine together. The sea has always been a friend to smugglers, but for Jorge Ochoa, it's a patient, demanding ally. By 1981, the Medellín network is sending product out of Colombia in every conceivable way. Airstrips tucked into jungle clearings, couriers boarding commercial flights, even creative overland routes through Central America. But the sea routes, slow and deliberate, are where Jorge's precision thrives. Cargo ships are less glamorous than speedboats. They don't make for exciting news footage, and they certainly don't offer the adrenaline rush that some of Escobar's younger pilots crave. But they carry volume, tons at a time, hidden in containers of coffee, bananas, and sometimes scrap metal. Once those ships clear Colombian waters, they become floating vaults, far harder to intercept than a single plane. Jorge oversees the setup personally. Hidden compartments are built into shipping containers, lined with materials that confuse X-ray scans and trained sniffer dogs. Dock workers on both ends are paid well to keep their eyes and mouths shut. Bills of lading are altered to misdirect any inspection efforts. In Cartagena's port, Jorge walks the docks with the ease of a man who belongs there. He's learned to dress like the mid-level managers, button-down shirt, nothing too flashy. blending in among the bustle of cranes and forklifts. The foremen know him as a polite, prompt payer. They don't ask too many questions about why his shipments always seem to be routed through specific ships and captains. The destinations are varied: Miami, Tampa, New Orleans, and increasingly, European ports, where cocaine is still a rare, exotic commodity, fetching even higher prices. Ships headed to Spain or the Netherlands might carry only a few pallets of concealed cargo, but the profits are enormous. To keep these operations safe, Jorge insists on compartmentalization. The crew loading the containers doesn't know the final destination. The contacts in Miami don't know the names of the Colombian suppliers. Every link in the chain is isolated, making it harder for anyone arrested to unravel the entire route. Escobar respects Jorge's thoroughness, though he sometimes teases him about being too cautious. Jorge simply smiles. He's seen too many operators undone by rushing. In this business, the patient man often survives the longest. One particularly lucrative shipment in 1982 involves a freighter bound for Rotterdam. Disguised as a load of Colombian coffee, it carries nearly a ton of cocaine concealed in modified steel drums. When the cargo arrives, it's unloaded into a warehouse before customs even touches it. The payout is astronomical, enough to buy more ranches, more horses, and, if needed, more silence. Many people still think that the cartel's ocean routes were just backups for when air shipments failed. But in truth, these sea lanes were the backbone of sustained supply. So, what do you think? Is it better to move fast and risk everything, or move slow and own the game for years? By the mid-'80s, the Ochoa-managed sea routes are considered untouchable. U.S. authorities know they exist, but tracing them is like trying to follow a single ripple in a shifting tide. And as long as the sea keeps offering its endless horizon, Jorge intends to keep using it. Miami in the early 1980s is a city buzzing with contradictions. Sunlight glints off glass towers while just blocks away. Warehouses hum with a different kind of commerce. Jorge Ochoa steps into this world not as a conqueror, but as an investor, a man with roots to maintain and partners to cultivate. The Ochoa's foothold in Florida is built with the same patience that has marked all of Jorge's moves. While others crash into the Miami scene with flashy mansions and fast cars, he prefers low-profile condos in Coral Gables and Key Biscayne. Meetings happen in quiet restaurants, never in the chaos of nightclubs where the wrong set of ears might be leaning too close. At first, Miami is simply a receiving point. The product moves from Colombia by air or sea, lands in discreet warehouses, and is broken down for local distribution or transit to other U.S. cities. Jorge doesn't handle street-level sales. He leaves that to established American contacts, but he ensures that the logistics remain invisible. His early partners in Miami include import-export brokers, shipping agents, and a handful of exiled businessmen from Latin America who understand the value of discretion. Some have legitimate businesses that can mask incoming shipments. Others operate entirely in the shadows. What matters is that the cargo moves quickly from port to safe storage, avoiding prolonged exposure to law enforcement sweeps. Jorge also understands the importance of local politics. Miami's sudden wealth boom has put pressure on the police to show results, but it has also created opportunities for corruption. A few key figures in customs and port authority are quietly persuaded to look elsewhere when certain containers pass through. While Escobar is making headlines in Colombia, building soccer fields, giving interviews, and even winning a seat in Congress, Jorge prefers that his name never cross into public discourse. His role in Miami is to keep the doors open, the shipments on time, and the money flowing back to Medellín. One deal in 1983 stands out. A shipment concealed in frozen seafood arrives at the port of Miami, cleared within hours. By nightfall, the load is split into smaller packages and sent north along the I-95 corridor. Within 2 days, the entire cargo is sold, and the profits are already being laundered through real estate purchases and shell companies. Many people still think that Miami's cocaine boom was driven entirely by flamboyant kingpins, but in truth, the quiet operators, the ones who knew how to keep their heads down, were the ones who made it sustainable. So what do you think? Is it the man in the spotlight who shapes history, or the one standing just outside the camera's frame? By 1984, the Ochoa's Miami network is strong enough to operate with minimal oversight from Colombia. Jorge checks in periodically, but the system largely runs itself, freeing him to focus on the broader picture. Miami is just one port in a growing empire, but it's a port that never sleeps, and Jorge intends to keep it that way. The polo fields have always been Jorge Ochoa's most elegant camouflage. By the mid-1980s, his presence at high-profile tournaments in Colombia, the United States, and Europe offers a layer of legitimacy that few law enforcement agencies bother to peel away. Horses and sport are, after all, respectable pursuits, far removed from the underworld in the public mind. It's on these lush, manicured fields that deals are often seated. Between chucas, over a glass of champagne, Jorge talks breeding lines, saddle craftsmanship, and the health of the sport. Yet behind the easy conversation lies the real purpose: maintaining relationships with wealthy patrons who can open doors in customs offices, shipping companies, and political circles. Money laundering through polo is as simple as it is effective. Prize winnings are declared as income. Horses are bought and sold at inflated prices, their true value hidden beneath the veneer of rarity and pedigree. Transporting $1 million stallion overseas provides the perfect excuse for moving cargo in the same plane's hold. Paperwork is impeccable, signatures genuine, and no one questions why a celebrated breeder might travel with crates and equipment. The social gatherings after matches are just as valuable. Politicians mingle with businessmen, foreign dignitaries chat with Colombian elites, and Jorge, always polite, always measured, listens more than he speaks. He has a way of making people feel they're confiding in someone safe, someone who won't repeat their words. It's in this environment that the Ochoas perfect the art of blending illicit funds with legitimate earnings. The revenue from their equestrian activities is enough to withstand scrutiny, and when questioned, their accountants can produce clean ledgers backed by real transactions. It's not a facade. It's a parallel business running alongside the cartel's operations. One particular transaction in 1984 involves the sale of a champion horse to a European buyer. The payment is routed through multiple banks before landing in a Medellín account, mixed seamlessly with polo-related income. The horse is real. The sale is real. But so is the hidden cargo that leaves on the same flight, declared as equipment. Many people still think that laundering was a complex, mysterious art. But in reality, some of the most effective methods were the simplest, hiding in plain sight. So what do you think? Is it harder to see something that's hidden in darkness, or something that's standing right in the sunlight? By keeping his polo profile spotless, Jorge ensures that the Ochoa name remains respectable in elite circles. The newspapers may run headlines about Medellín violence, but in the glossy pages of equestrian magazines, he is simply a breeder, a patron of the sport, and a man whose horses move between continents with the ease of a champion rider crossing the field. The first major fracture in the Ochoa brothers' composed world comes not from law enforcement or rival traffickers, but from something far more personal: family. In late 1981, Jorge's younger sister, Marta Nieves Ochoa, is kidnapped in Medellín. The perpetrators are members of the leftist guerrilla group M19, a movement that has already made headlines for its armed raids and high-profile abductions. For the Ochoas, this is not just a family matter. It's a direct challenge. In their world, an attack on one member is an attack on all. The news of Marta's abduction spreads quickly through Medellín's underworld, and it's clear that the guerrillas believe they can pressure the family for ransom money or political leverage. They have underestimated the response. Within days, the Ochoas, Escobar, and several other cartel figures convene. The tone is not frantic. It's cold, decisive. They agree that paying ransom will only invite further attacks. Instead, they decide to form a united front under the banner Muerte a Secuestradores, MAS, or Death to Kidnappers. MAS is more than a slogan. It's a coalition of cartel members, hired gunmen, and sympathetic forces in law enforcement who see the guerrillas as a mutual enemy. Names are compiled, safe houses identified, and operations planned with military precision. For Jorge, who has always preferred quiet negotiation, this is a shift into open confrontation. Over the following weeks, MAS units move through Medellín and the surrounding countryside, striking suspected M19 hideouts. Informants are paid handsomely for tips, and anyone connected to Marta's kidnapping is hunted relentlessly. The campaign is brutal, and its message is unmistakable. Abducting cartel family members carries a cost far beyond ransom money. Marta is eventually released, shaken but unharmed. Officially, there is no deal, no payment, but in reality, her freedom is the result of a calculated mix of pressure and fear. The guerrillas realize that holding her any longer is a death sentence for everyone involved. This incident transforms the cartel's posture toward outside threats. Until now, their violence has been mostly reserved for the business sphere, rivals, informants, and the occasional uncooperative official. But MAS shows that the Medellín cartel can act as a political force when provoked, uniting otherwise competitive factions against a common enemy. Many people still think that the formation of MAS was simply about vengeance, but it was also a signal to Colombia's fractured power players that the cartel was willing to protect its own in ways the government could not or would not. So what do you think? Was this about justice or about staking a permanent claim to untouchable status? For Jorge, the episode confirms two truths. First, that loyalty within the cartel is not just about profit. It's about survival as a family, whether by blood or by business. Second, that once a line is crossed, there's no going back to quiet negotiations. The world has now seen what happens when the Ochoas are pushed too far, and that knowledge will follow him for the rest of his life. MAS does not fade when Marta Nieves Ochoa is returned. It expands. What began as a mission to recover one woman becomes a sustained campaign against kidnappers of all kinds. Jorge Ochoa, who has built his reputation on discretion, finds himself at the helm of an operation that is anything but subtle. Through the early 1980s, MAS becomes both feared and quietly supported. Wealthy ranchers, businessmen, and politicians, many of whom have suffered kidnappings or extortion attempts, offer funds, intelligence, or safe passage. For them, MAS is doing the job the police cannot or will not do. The methods are ruthless. Suspected guerrilla sympathizers vanish from city streets. Safe houses are raided at night, their occupants never seen again. In the rural areas, patrols sweep through villages known for harboring insurgents. Some of these raids have little to do with actual kidnapping cases. Settling old scores becomes part of the equation. Jorge oversees MAS with the same attention to detail he applies to smuggling. Lists of targets are checked and double-checked. Informants are cultivated carefully, paid promptly, and kept in the shadows. When MAS units act, they do so with efficiency that makes government operations look slow by comparison. For Jorge, MAS is not about ideology. He is not fighting for the government nor against it. He is protecting a network, a family, and an empire. Kidnapping is bad for business, not just because it takes people off the board, but because it breeds instability. If partners and family members are vulnerable, trust erodes, and the roots that keep the cartel alive begin to fracture. In public, the Ochoas remain untouchable figures in Medellin's elite circles. They attend polo matches, host parties, and appear in society pages, all while MAS operatives carry out their work in the background. The duality is striking. One day, Jorge is shaking hands with a foreign ambassador at a polo club. The next, a raid is taking place under his orders miles away. Many people still think that MAS was simply an arm of the Medellin cartel, but in truth, it drew from far beyond the underworld. Paramilitary veterans, disillusioned police, and civilians with their own reasons for revenge. So, what do you think? Was MAS a criminal enterprise cloaked in a cause, or a cause that became inseparable from crime? By 1983, MAS is so entrenched that even government forces hesitate to interfere. Some officials quietly pass information to Jorge's men, preferring to see kidnappers eliminated without messy trials. Others look the other way entirely. The guerrillas, for their part, begin to think twice before targeting anyone connected to Medellin's power structure. For Jorge Ochoa Vásquez, MAS is both shield and sword. It protects his family and sends a message that echoes beyond Antioquia's hills. Some people are simply too dangerous to cross, and that message, once delivered, is almost impossible to erase. By the mid-1980s, Jorge Ochoa's life has become a balancing act between violence and diplomacy. On one side, MAS continues its quiet but relentless campaign. On the other, Jorge is hosting dignitaries, foreign investors, and high-ranking officials under the pretense of social gatherings. The same ranch that once echoed only with the sound of horses now serves as a discreet meeting place for men who shape Colombia's future, both legally and illegally. These gatherings are carefully orchestrated. Guests arrive in staggered intervals, some flown in on private planes, others driven through back roads to avoid attention. Meals are lavish but not ostentatious, enough to impress without provoking questions about where the money comes from. Fine wines, imported spirits, and Colombian coffee are served in the open-air dining room as the night air carries the faint scent of rain over the pastures. Conversations rarely touch the business of cocaine directly. Instead, they revolve around trade opportunities, infrastructure projects, agricultural development. But beneath the polite language, deals are struck. A politician agrees to push a certain regulation. A customs official receives assurances that his department will run smoothly in the coming year. In exchange, Jorge secures the kind of invisible protection that allows his shipping routes to operate without disruption. The Ochoa's reputation as horse breeders and polo patrons remains the perfect cover. Journalists can photograph them alongside foreign ambassadors without suspecting that, in the hours before, Jorge was finalizing the logistics of a multi-ton shipment to the United States. It's not just Colombians in attendance. There are visitors from Panama, Mexico, and even Spain. Men with legitimate businesses who are willing to blend their operations with cartel cargo for a share of the profit. The global nature of the enterprise is becoming harder to ignore, and Jorge knows that the more international the network becomes, the more complex the risks will be. Yet, he thrives in this environment. Unlike Escobar, who relishes the crowd's roar, Jorge prefers the low murmur of conversations that lead to quiet, powerful commitments. A favor owed is worth more than a contract signed, and he collects them like a banker collects debts, carefully, methodically, with no rush to cash them in until the moment is right. Many people still think that the cartel's reach into politics was an accident of corruption, but in reality, it was a deliberate, cultivated network. So what do you think? Is power something you stumble into, or something you groom with the patience of a man raising a champion stallion? By the time the guests leave, the ranch settles back into its usual quiet. Horses shift in their stalls, the cicadas resume their night song, and the guards take up their posts along the fence line. Another round of meetings has ended without a single public trace, and Jorge Ochoa Vásquez has added yet another layer of insulation around his empire. From the air, the Ochoa family ranch looks like a serene estate, rolling green pastures, white-fenced paddocks, and tiled roof stables arranged with postcard precision. But inside those fences, the property doubles as a command post for one of the most powerful smuggling networks in the world. By 1984, the ranch is more than just home. It is where shipments are planned, routes are adjusted, and intelligence is shared. Visitors arrive under the guise of equestrian buyers, livestock traders, or old family friends. Many leave with more than they came for, sometimes in the form of instructions, sometimes in the form of cash-packed envelopes. The Ochoas are careful to keep the appearance of normal ranch life. Workers tend to the horses at dawn. The smell of hay and leather fills the barns. Jorge often walks the grounds in riding boots, greeting staff by name. To an outsider, it's the picture of rural prestige. But to those in the know, the ranch is also a secure hub where critical decisions are made over afternoon asados and late-night brandy. Jorge prefers these surroundings for meetings. In the city, eyes and ears are everywhere. Waiters, hotel staff, even passers-by who might recognize a face. On the ranch, the only sounds are the wind in the trees and the occasional whinny of a horse. Here, trust feels tangible, and discretion comes naturally. Shipments are coordinated from a small office tucked away in one of the outbuildings. Maps cover the walls, shipping lanes, aerial routes, road networks through Central America. A shortwave radio and secure phone lines connect the ranch to contacts in Miami, Panama, and the Caribbean. The men who pass through this office know they are inside the heart of something far bigger than any single deal. Security is tight, but unobtrusive. Armed men patrol the perimeter, but they do so in jeans and work shirts, blending in as ranch hands. Vehicles entering or leaving are quietly inspected. Even deliveries of feed or supplies are logged, a habit born from the understanding that the smallest oversight can lead to exposure. It's during one of these ranch meetings that Jorge finalizes an ambitious plan, a direct shipping lane to Europe using a trusted fleet operating out of Barranquilla. The payout will be enormous, and the European market's hunger for high-purity product means repeat business is almost guaranteed. The decision is made over grilled beef and chimichurri, with the sun setting low over the hills. Many people still think that operations like these required sprawling urban hideouts, but in reality, rural estates like the Ochoas were the safest headquarters imaginable. So what do you think? Is secrecy about hiding in the shadows, or about standing in the open where no one suspects you belong to the dark? By nightfall, the ranch returns to its peaceful rhythm. Horses chew hay in their stalls. The smell of wood smoke drifts from the main house, and the maps in the outbuilding remain pinned to the walls. Silent blueprints of an empire built on both trust and fear. The Caribbean has always been a tempting corridor for smugglers, a blue highway stretching from Colombia's coast to the edges of Florida and the Gulf of Mexico. By the early 1980s, Jorge Ochoa sees its potential not just for the United States, but as a gateway to the wider world. Planes are fast, but the sea, if handled correctly, offers a steady, reliable flow that can feed multiple markets at once. The air bridge concept emerges from necessity and ingenuity. Using small aircraft capable of long-range flights, product moves from hidden airstrips along Colombia's northern coast to islands scattered across the Caribbean. From there, it can be stored, repackaged, or shipped onward to the mainland United States or Europe. Jorge isn't the first to try this method, but he refines it. The planes he uses are chosen not for flash, but for endurance and payload capacity. Pilots are vetted with extreme care, often coming from backgrounds in legitimate cargo transport. Many are paid not just in cash, but with guarantees of protection for their families, a policy that keeps them loyal. The airstrips themselves are minimalist affairs. Some are nothing more than flattened stretches of dirt carved out of cattle pastures, while others are old, abandoned military runways. They are chosen for their remoteness and for the ease of concealing them in everyday agricultural activity. When the authorities fly overhead, they see nothing more suspicious than a working farm. On one run in 1983, a pair of twin-engine planes lift off from Colombia, loaded with tightly wrapped cargo. They land on a small Bahamian island under the cover of night, greeted by a skeleton crew that transfers the shipment onto waiting boats. By sunrise, the planes are back in Colombia, stripped of any trace of their journey, while the cargo heads toward Miami under a false manifest. Jorge's meticulous scheduling is what makes these runs so effective. Flights are timed to avoid both military patrols and the busiest windows for commercial air traffic. Weather patterns are studied in detail. Turbulence is more than an inconvenience. It's a risk to delicate timing and precise navigation. The air bridge also offers flexibility. If U.S. enforcement tightens around Florida, the shipments can pivot toward Mexico or even directly to Europe via refueling stops in West Africa. This adaptability keeps the network alive when other routes are compromised. Many people still think that the cartel's air operations were reckless, adrenaline-fueled gambles. But in Jorge's hands, they were as calculated as any corporate supply chain. So what do you think? Is survival in this world about daring, or about knowing exactly when not to dare? By mid-decade, the Caribbean Air Bridge is moving tons of product each month, and Jorge knows that its true strength lies not in its speed, but in the rhythm he has built into it. Predictable for his men, unpredictable for everyone else. It's the same lesson he learned on the ranch. The best routes are the ones that look like they've always been there. By 1984, Jorge Ochoa's reach extends far beyond Medellín's hills and coastal airstrips. In Bogotá, the capital's political corridors hum with quiet conversations about the problem, the ever-growing shadow of the cocaine trade. Publicly, senators and ministers denounce the traffickers. Privately, some meet with them over expensive lunches in Chapinero or behind closed doors in private clubs, weighing favors against principles. Jorge moves in these circles with the same calm precision he brings to smuggling. He doesn't seek the public visibility that Pablo Escobar courts. Instead, he prefers the power that comes from being a name whispered in the right ears. A meeting with a customs official might be framed as a discussion about agricultural exports. A conversation with a legislator might revolve around investment opportunities in rural Antioquia. The actual subject, the protection of cartel routes, is never spoken outright, yet both sides understand. Money is the universal translator here. Campaign donations appear in neat bundles, funneled through intermediaries to avoid a direct trail. Construction projects in certain districts are mysteriously funded. Ranching cooperatives receive sudden injections of capital. Every peso comes with an unspoken condition: leave certain doors open, close certain files, and keep certain names off certain lists. One of Jorge's most delicate tasks is navigating the growing extradition debate. The United States is pressing Colombia to allow the transfer of traffickers to American courts, where sentences are longer and prisons harder to reach. For the Ochoas, extradition isn't just a threat, it's the nightmare scenario. In Colombia, influence can be wielded. In the U.S., they would be just another inmate in a steel cage. The cartel's position is firm. No extradition, ever. To that end, Jorge supports a quiet lobbying effort, channeling money into campaigns of politicians who oppose the treaty. In return, those politicians stall votes, raise constitutional objections, or simply let the matter languish in committee. It's a strategy of delay, buying time while the cartel grows stronger. Publicly, Jorge maintains his image as a businessman. He appears in photos at polo matches, hosts dinners for visiting diplomats, and sponsors rural development initiatives. Privately, his network keeps watch over the political climate, ready to apply pressure wherever it's needed. Many people still think that political influence in Colombia was built with crude threats alone, but in Jorge's world, it's often built with polite smiles and carefully placed checks. So, what do you think? Is it the blunt force that bends power, or the steady hand that guides it without leaving fingerprints? As the capital cools into evening, Jorge leaves a discreet meeting in a quiet corner of a Bogotá club. Outside, the city lights glitter in the high-altitude air, and somewhere in the distance, a plane lifts off from El Dorado Airport. Another shipment heading north, untouched by the politics that swirl just a few blocks away. Escobar is everywhere by 1984, on the front pages, in whispered rumors, on the lips of both admirers and enemies. His bombastic gestures, from building housing projects to defying the United States, make him the de facto face of the Medellín cartel. And while the spotlight burns hot on Pablo, Jorge Ochoa is content to let it blind everyone else to his own movements. This is no accident. The Ochoas understand that visibility brings risk. Jorge deliberately avoids public speeches, press photos, or anything that could tie him directly to cartel violence. While Pablo engages in public feuds with politicians and journalists, Jorge maintains the image of a gentleman rancher and horse breeder. Even within the cartel, he fosters the perception that Escobar is the one pulling every string. That doesn't mean he's idle. Behind the scenes, Jorge manages critical routes and oversees the expansion of European connections. Spain, with its linguistic and cultural ties to Colombia, becomes a key entry point. From there, shipments can move into France, Italy, and the Netherlands with minimal attention. Jorge also uses Escobar's fame as a shield. When U.S. agencies draw up most wanted lists, it's Pablo's face that appears at the top. International media fixates on his flamboyance, his rumored billions, his war with the Colombian state. In the background, Jorge keeps the machinery running. confident that a quiet operator can often outlast the loudest voice in the room. Within the inner circle, this balance is understood. Escobar is the lightning rod, the one who can rally allies or intimidate enemies with sheer force of will. Jorge is the counterweight, the man who keeps things from tipping too far, too fast. When tensions flare with rival factions or with government forces, Jorge is often the one sent to negotiate, smoothing over conflicts before they become costly. A telling example comes during a standoff with a smaller trafficking group in the Magdalena region. Escobar wants to send a violent message. Jorge proposes a trade, access to a high-demand U.S. route in exchange for peace. The deal is made quietly, and the incident never reaches the newspapers. Many people still think that every cartel decision was dictated by Escobar alone. But in truth, survival often depended on quieter negotiations conducted in ranch kitchens and private offices. So what do you think? Is leadership about being the loudest, or about making sure your voice is never needed until the moment it matters most? By year's end, Escobar's fame is peaking, and his danger to himself is growing. Jorge knows the government's patience will not last forever. When the day comes that the full weight of the state falls on Pablo, he intends to be far enough in the shadows that the spotlight never reaches him. By the mid-1980s, the Medellín cartel's ambitions are no longer confined to the Americas. Jorge Ochoa, ever the strategist, has his eyes on Europe, a market where demand for high-purity cocaine is rising rapidly and where competition is still limited. The profit margins are staggering. A kilo that fetches a strong price in Miami can bring several times that amount in Madrid, Paris, or Milan. Spain becomes the natural bridge. Shared language, strong Colombian expatriate communities, and deep commercial ties make it an ideal staging ground. Jorge begins cultivating relationships in Madrid's business and nightlife circles, often through intermediaries who can pass as legitimate importers. Polo once again plays its role. European equestrian events give Jorge the perfect excuse to travel without raising suspicion. The shipments bound for Europe are a different breed from those aimed at the U.S. They move more slowly, often disguised within legitimate cargo headed to Mediterranean ports. Coffee, tropical fruits, and cut flowers are reliable covers. In some cases, the product is shipped as far as West Africa first, then rerouted north to avoid scrutiny, a method that not only works, but adds a layer of deniability. Jorge's network in Spain is anchored by a handful of well-placed associates, including businessmen who own warehouses near major ports. These facilities double as distribution hubs, allowing the product to be broken down into smaller loads before moving into the continent's interior. From there, trusted partners in France, Belgium, and Italy take over. One of the earliest and most lucrative runs involves a container of Colombian bananas bound for Valencia. Inside, among the stacks of fruit, custom-built crates hold sealed packages. The shipment clears customs with ease, and within a week, it's been quietly sold across several European cities. The payout flows back through offshore accounts, mixed with the proceeds of legitimate exports. Jorge enjoys the relative calm of the European market. There is violence, of course. Competition always brings it, but nothing like the open warfare that sometimes erupts in Colombia. Business here depends more on trust and connections than on intimidation. Deals are sealed over dinners in Madrid's private clubs or during late-night conversations in Barcelona apartments. Many people still think that the Medellín cartel's European expansion was a side project, but for operators like Jorge, it was an essential pillar of long-term survival. So what do you think? Is real security found in fortifying your home ground, or in planting seeds far from where anyone expects you to be. By 1986, Jorge's European channels are running smoothly, feeding a growing appetite across the continent. It's another layer of insulation, another way to ensure that if pressure builds in one part of the world, the business can keep breathing elsewhere. And for a man who values longevity over spectacle, that is worth more than gold. The Ochoa family name, despite whispers in certain circles, still carries a sheen of respectability in public. Jorge understands the value of that facade and works tirelessly to protect it. While Escobar's name has become synonymous with blood and headlines, the Ochoas are still invited to social events, still welcomed in Bogotá's upper-class gatherings, still photographed at charity galas and polo tournaments. Jorge knows that in the court of public opinion, perception is often stronger than fact. He makes sure the family is seen supporting rural development projects, funding schools, donating equipment to farming cooperatives, sponsoring local festivals. These gestures, though a fraction of the cartel's earnings, create goodwill that money alone can't buy. Family members outside the immediate cartel business also play a role. Cousins and in-laws manage legitimate ventures in livestock, real estate, and hospitality. These enterprises act as clean fronts for investment, but they also serve to anchor the Ochoas as pillars of the community. When a newspaper article hints at their underworld connections, there's always a counter-narrative ready. The Ochoas, successful entrepreneurs and generous benefactors, unfairly maligned by rumor. Jorge's personal life remains insulated. He avoids public scandals, keeps his relationships discreet, and shields his children from the darker side of his work. At social gatherings, he's the man with stories about horses, travel, and agriculture, not gunfights or smuggling runs. Friends of the family often remark that Jorge is the sensible one, a perception he quietly cultivates. Of course, in private, his protective instinct extends to shielding the family from law enforcement. He ensures that their legitimate businesses are clean, taxes paid, records flawless, no loose ends that could lead to raids. Even in the rare moments when a police investigation brushes close, there's nothing concrete to seize. The value of this public image becomes clear when political pressure mounts against the cartel. While Escobar and others are denounced in Congress and splashed across international headlines, the Ochoa's name rarely makes it into official statements. They are mentioned as associates or alleged participants, but never with the same certainty or outrage. Many people still think that cartel survival was purely about outgunning rivals, but Jorge proves that outlasting your enemies often means outmaneuvering them socially. So what do you think? Is the safest place in a storm at the center of the fight? Or in the calm just outside where no one's looking too closely? By the late 1980s, the Ochoa family remains a paradox, celebrated in polite society, feared in the underworld, and always careful to keep those two worlds from colliding. And Jorge, as always, stands in the middle, making sure neither side ever fully sees the other. The Medellín cartel's unity has always been fragile, stitched together by shared profits and mutual enemies. By the late 1980s, cracks begin to show. As the business grows, so do the egos and ambitions within it. Alliances shift quietly. A careless word at a dinner can ripple into weeks of mistrust. Jorge Ochoa senses the tension early. He has always preferred negotiation over confrontation, and in these years, that skill becomes his most valuable asset. Rivalries between factions threaten to spill into open conflict, especially when disputes arise over shipping routes or profit splits. Escobar's temper doesn't help. His instinct is to respond to perceived slights with immediate force, while others advocate patience. One particular dispute centers on a lucrative Caribbean route that both the Ochoa network and an allied group claim as their own. Escobar leans towards sending an armed crew to seize control. Jorge, instead, arranges a private meeting with the other group's leader. Over a quiet lunch in a coastal hacienda, he proposes a compromise: shared use of the route, with schedules staggered to avoid interference. The deal preserves both the profits and the fragile peace. Jorge's ability to stay above personal grudges makes him a trusted intermediary. He can walk into a room of men who don't trust each other and leave with an agreement no one expected. His calm demeanor masks the fact that these negotiations are as dangerous as any smuggling run. One wrong word, and the conversation can turn fatal. Inside the cartel, these talks are rarely about morality. They are about survival. A feud that escalates into violence draws police attention, scares off reliable partners, and disrupts the delicate rhythm of shipments. Jorge knows that the real threat to the cartel isn't just the DEA or Colombian military. It's the internal fractures that can destroy them from within. The irony is that, in avoiding conflict, Jorge sometimes increases his own influence. Men who might bristle under Escobar's command find Jorge's diplomacy easier to accept. They begin to see him not just as an equal partner, but as a stabilizing force the cartel can't afford to lose. Many people still think that the Medellín cartel's power came only from fear, but fear alone can't hold men together for years. So what do you think? Is it more dangerous to lead with a gun in hand, or with the patience to make sure the gun never needs to be drawn? By the time the next crisis arises, a government crackdown that threatens multiple operations, Jorge has already built the trust needed to rally factions to a common defense. For now, the cartel holds together, its members united by a shared understanding. Survival depends on keeping the machine running, no matter how loud the gears grind behind the scenes. The word extradition hangs over the Medellín cartel like a storm cloud that never drifts away. By the late 1980s, the United States is increasing pressure on Colombia to hand over traffickers for trial on American soil. For Jorge Ochoa, it's not an abstract threat. It's the one scenario where money, influence, and connections might mean nothing. In Colombia, a man of his stature can negotiate, bribe, or leverage favors to soften the blows of the law. In the U.S., he would be stripped of all that, reduced to an inmate number in a federal prison. The difference is existential. The cartel's stance is absolute. No extradition, ever. Publicly, members denounce it as an insult to Colombian sovereignty. Privately, they know it is the only way they can continue to operate with any sense of control. Escobar pushes the loudest, rallying support through speeches and public gestures. Jorge, in contrast, works the quieter angles, funding legal challenges, backing sympathetic legislators, and securing allies in influential places. The extraditables, as the press calls them, even begin a coordinated propaganda effort. Billboards in Medellín proclaim, "We prefer a grave in Colombia to a cell in the United States." The slogan becomes a rallying cry, echoed in demonstrations and woven into the rhetoric of sympathetic politicians. Jorge doesn't appear at these protests, but his money helps them happen. His legal advisors, a small team of skilled attorneys, monitor every extradition-related bill in Congress. Whenever a vote nears, Jorge makes sure the right people are reminded of past favors or offered new ones. Campaign funds flow quietly, Real estate deals appear in the right hands, and public endorsements are made at just the right time. Still, the pressure is unrelenting. The U.S. sends more agents to Colombia, coordinates with military units, and publicly names cartel members they want in custody. Jorge sees his own name appear on a list once, quickly followed by denials from local allies who insist there's no proof of his involvement in trafficking. Many people still think that the fight against extradition was driven purely by pride, but for men like Jorge, it was about survival in its most basic form. So what do you think? Is it courage to defy the strongest nation in the world, or simply desperation dressed in patriotic colors? By the end of the decade, the battle over extradition is shaping every move the cartel makes. Shipments are planned with more layers of protection, meetings are held with greater secrecy, and trusted safe houses are prepared, not just to hide from Colombian police, but from the possibility of an American transport plane waiting at the end of the road. For Jorge Ochoa, the stakes have never been clearer. In this fight, there is no middle ground. You either keep your freedom, or you lose everything. By the early 1990s, the pressure on the Medellín cartel has reached a fever pitch. The Colombian government, under both domestic and U.S. pressure, is conducting coordinated raids, seizing assets, and tracking the movements of high-profile traffickers. For Jorge Ochoa, survival now depends on calculated retreats, steps backward that preserve the ability to move forward later. He scales down his public appearances, limiting his presence at polo matches and social events. Travel becomes more discreet. Private airfields replace commercial flights, and meetings are held in ever more secluded locations. Even the family ranch, once a bustling hub of visitors and quiet deals, is pared down to essential personnel only. Jorge's philosophy is simple. Visibility is vulnerability. The more the authorities know about where he is and what he's doing, the narrower his options become. So he creates layers of misdirection. In 1 month, he might be reported in 3 different countries, none of which he has actually visited. Associates relay messages through trusted intermediaries, ensuring that nothing important can be traced directly back to him. Law enforcement efforts are relentless. Convoys of military vehicles sweep rural areas, helicopters hover over suspected hideouts, and roadblocks appear on routes once considered safe. The DEA is working more closely than ever with Colombian intelligence, and extradition orders are now a matter of signed paperwork, not prolonged political debate. In this climate, Jorge focuses on reducing his operational footprint. Shipments continue, but on a smaller scale and through more fragmented channels. The strategy is to make the network harder to map. If one route is compromised, it won't take the rest down with it. Profits dip, but survival is worth the cost. He also leans heavily on long-standing alliances. Safe houses maintained by old friends become temporary refuges. Rural towns where the Ochoa name still commands respect provide cover in ways the city never could. Farmers, shopkeepers, and local officials quietly pass along warnings when strangers or uniformed men appear. Many people still think that the end of the Medellín cartel was a sudden collapse, but for men like Jorge, it was more of a slow, deliberate unspooling, a retreat measured in weeks and months, not in one final act. So what do you think? Is true survival about holding the line or knowing when to step back before it breaks? By late 1990, Jorge has perfected the art of being hard to find without ever truly disappearing. He's present enough to maintain control, absent enough to make capture difficult. It's a balancing act few can sustain for long, but for the moment, It keeps him one step ahead of both his enemies and his supposed protectors. By 1991, the walls are closing in. The government's new approach, blending military force with political pressure, leaves the Medellín cartel with fewer safe havens and fewer allies in high places. Public opinion is shifting as well. Ordinary Colombians, once impressed or at least indifferent to the traffickers' wealth, are growing weary of the violence that shadows every shipment and negotiation. Jorge Ochoa, always the pragmatist, begins considering an option that only a few years earlier would have been unthinkable: surrender. Not the chaotic, last-minute kind forced by a raid, but a negotiated one, on his own terms, in his own time, with safeguards for himself and his family. The idea circulates quietly within the cartel's upper tier. If certain leaders can secure deals with the government, they can avoid extradition to the United States by serving limited sentences in Colombia. In return, they agree to halt trafficking activities, at least officially, and provide intelligence on rival groups or rogue operatives. For Jorge, the benefits are clear. He could protect his family, preserve portions of his fortune, and remove himself from the increasingly unstable battleground between Medellín and the state. But surrender carries risks. Even a friendly agreement requires trust in a government that has spent years hunting him. And in an environment where loyalties shift quickly, that trust is fragile. Behind closed doors, Jorge begins sending feelers through intermediaries, lawyers, sympathetic politicians, even clergy trusted by both sides. The terms he seeks are specific: no extradition, confinement in a secure facility of his choosing, and guarantees for the safety of his relatives and associates. Meanwhile, he quietly reduces his operational role. Routes are handed off to trusted lieutenants, large shipments are paused, and some assets are liquidated or moved into more discreet holdings. Each move is designed to make his surrender appear like a gesture of good faith rather than an act of desperation. Many people still think that surrender was a sign of weakness, but in Jorge's calculus, it was another form of control, choosing when and how to give ground. So what do you think? Is the strongest man the one who never bends, or the one who decides exactly when to bend and how far? By mid-year, the negotiations are no longer hypothetical. The Colombian government, eager to claim a high-profile victory without triggering more violence, signals its willingness to talk. For Jorge, the path forward is now clear: step into custody on his own terms, and trade a measure of freedom for the promise of a quieter future. The day Jorge Ochoa surrenders is nothing like the spectacle many imagine. There are no flashing lights, no heavily armed squads dragging him from a safe house. Instead, it happens quietly, almost ceremonially, in the company of his lawyers and a small contingent of trusted intermediaries. It is the culmination of months of careful planning, not the chaos of a desperate man cornered. The government, eager to present this as a triumph, stages a subdued press opportunity. Photographers at a respectful distance, officials speaking of justice and national security. But the unspoken truth is that Jorge is walking into this arrangement with far more leverage than the public will ever know. The deal guarantees no extradition to the United States, confinement in a facility he has personally vetted, and continued protection for his family. His prison is nothing like the grim concrete blocks most inmates face. It's a secure but comfortable compound, with private quarters, open-air patios, and access to amenities that blur the line between incarceration and house arrest. Guards are technically in charge, but most are men who respect his influence, and some are quietly loyal. From within these walls, Jorge maintains a limited but effective presence in the outside world. Visitors come and go under the pretense of legal consultations or family visits. Messages travel out through coded notes and trusted couriers. While he is careful not to overtly manage cartel operations, his advice is still sought, and his opinion still carries weight. For many in the Medellín network, his surrender is seen as a smart move, a way to remove himself from the immediate crosshairs while keeping the door open for future influence. It also serves as a signal to other leaders that negotiation, not just defiance, can be a viable survival strategy. Many people still think that surrender meant a clean break from the business, but the reality is more complex. So what do you think? Can a man truly walk away from an empire he helped build? Or does its shadow always follow him, no matter the walls between? As weeks turn into months, Jorge adapts to his new environment. The routines are predictable, the food is good, and the occasional game of polo on a nearby field, arranged under the guise of recreational activity, reminds him of the life he's put on pause. It is not freedom, but it is far from defeat. Jorge Ochoa's time behind bars is defined less by isolation and more by selective connection. The compound where he serves his sentence is secure, yes, but it is also tailored, almost curated, to allow him a degree of comfort and influence few prisoners could dream of. Mornings begin slowly. Breakfast is taken on a shaded patio, where the air smells faintly of fresh coffee and cut grass. Guards nod respectfully as he passes, and there's no mistaking that many of them treat him more like a guest than an inmate. The grounds are well kept, the walls high but not oppressive, and the rhythm of the place feels more like a private estate than a state-run penitentiary. Within these walls, Jorge cultivates his own small ecosystem. Fellow inmates, some connected to his world, others merely wealthy enough to secure placement here, seek his company. They share meals, discuss politics, exchange news from the outside. When disputes arise, it is often Jorge who mediates, his quiet authority carrying more weight than official orders. Family visits are regular, and with them comes the steady flow of personal updates, business news, and subtle reminders that the network he helped build is still operating. He avoids giving direct instructions, but his opinions, shared over an afternoon coffee, are rarely ignored once they leave the compound. Leisure, too, has its place. Books, radio broadcasts, and occasional polo practice on a nearby field keep him occupied. These outings, approved under the guise of recreation, also serve to maintain the image of a man whose identity is still tied to horses, not headlines. In this environment, Jorge learns the value of patience all over again. The outside world is chaotic. Violent turf wars, shifting alliances, intensified law enforcement. But inside, time moves in long, steady stretches. He knows his sentence is finite, and every day that passes without extradition is a day the deal holds firm. Many people still think that prison, for a man like Jorge, was a breaking point. But here, the bars are as much a shield as they are a cage. So what do you think? Is safety worth the price of confinement? Or does the loss of movement outweigh the protection it offers? As the years pass, Jorge's public presence fades further. New names begin to dominate the news. The Medellín cartel itself begins to fracture under the weight of internal conflicts and state pressure. And when Jorge finally steps out from behind the compound walls, it will be into a different world. One where his survival depends on disappearing more completely than ever before. When Jorge Ochoa walks out of custody, it is without fanfare. No cameras wait at the gates, no reporters press microphones to his face. The arrangement has been clear from the start. His release will be quiet, a bureaucratic formality rather than a public spectacle. And that suits him perfectly. The world he steps into has shifted. The Medellín cartel is no longer the unshakable force it once was. Escobar's war with the Colombian state has burned too hot, drawing relentless military and police action. Many of the old roots have been compromised, alliances broken, and fortunes scattered. Yet Jorge has something few of his former associates can claim: the ability to retreat without being hunted. He moves deliberately into a lower profile. The ranch remains, but its public activity is toned down. Horses are still bred, but the competitions are fewer, the travel less frequent. Investments in legitimate businesses, real estate, agriculture, logistics, become his main focus. The vast sums once moved through smuggling are now channeled into safer, slower streams of income. There is still money from the past, of course, carefully tucked away in offshore accounts and hidden properties. But Jorge understands that flaunting it would invite questions. Instead, he lives with the quiet wealth of a man who no longer needs to prove anything. Friends and former associates may visit, but the talk stays on polo, cattle prices, and family news. The dangerous conversations belong to another time. Occasionally, whispers circulate. Claims that Jorge still has influence in certain smuggling corridors, that his opinion still carries weight when disputes arise in the underworld. Whether those whispers are true is almost beside the point. The idea alone keeps his name present without forcing him back into the arena. Many people still think that stepping away from the cartel meant cutting all ties. But in truth, the shadow of an empire doesn't disappear. It lingers, following quietly behind. So what do you think? Can a man ever truly leave a life built so deeply into his own identity, or does he simply learn to live with its echo? As the years pass, Jorge Ochoa Vásquez remains a figure seen more in memory than in motion. In the history of the Medellín cartel, his name is rarely the loudest, but his imprint is undeniable. A silent co-founder whose patience, precision, and discretion allowed him to walk away when so many others could not. And so, as the night settles deeper, picture the hills of Antioquia once more. The air cools, the cicadas hum, and a lone horse moves slowly along the fence line, its silhouette fading into the dark. Somewhere in a quiet house, a man sits with a cup of coffee, his gaze fixed not on the past, but on the stillness of the present. The noise of those turbulent years has softened into memory. The danger, the negotiations, the endless movements across seas and skies. Now they rest in the background like an old photograph tucked away in a drawer. Outside, the stars are steady, the same ones that hung over the ranch decades ago when everything was just beginning. If there is peace in his life now, it is not the peace of innocence, but the peace of survival. It comes from knowing the value of stepping back, of letting others take the risks, of choosing silence when the world demands noise. The storms he navigated have passed, but the lessons remain. Lessons about trust, about patience, and about the cost of building something powerful enough to change the course of a country. So, as you drift toward sleep, let the sounds of that quiet ranch carry you. Hooves on soft earth, the rustle of leaves, the low murmur of voices that fade into the night. Somewhere, far from the headlines, a man like Jorge Ochoa sits in that same calm, the shadows of the past long behind him, the stillness of the present holding steady. And maybe in that quiet, there's a lesson for all of us about when to hold on and when to finally let go.